Welcome to Fueling Your Body for Success with me, Ali Taylor, on your Hysterectomy Fitness Recovery course. Now, in this talk, we're going to be delving into a little bit of the science around nutrition after surgery, nutrition for menopause, as well as nutrition and weight management after a hysterectomy, and some of the questions that come up with women that I've trained and also queries that tend to be seen on social media. So let's get straight into this. As I see it, nutrition after a hysterectomy has three main goals, and the most important one of these is really to ensure adequate nutrients are taken on board for full and really robust healing. That's got to be our first priority. The second is to manage weight post-surgery because your activity is reduced, and for most of us it's reduced significantly for a good 6 weeks and longer after that as we get back to normal. So most of us don't go bouncing back to our normal activity on the dot of week 6. There's a process to be gone through. The third is to ensure that nutrition supports the transition to menopause if your ovaries have been removed and menopause had not begun prior to surgery. So this means that you basically wake up in surgical menopause. But if you were already going through menopause prior to your surgery, you should still find some of the information useful here as well. So really the goal of post-operative nutrition is to promote what's called nitrogen balance. That's a chemical within the body that's highly important, to reduce the loss of lean mass, and that's from skeletal muscle tissue. We don't want to lose it if we can possibly help it, and to facilitate rapid healing and recovery. And although we're going to talk about the immediate post-operative phase, for most of you watching this, you will be well past that post-operative phase, but healing really does go on for that 12 weeks as we discussed in the healing talk. So, what we know about nutrition to support healing after recovery in the early post-operative phase. The first thing is that metabolic demand increases hugely, and this is in order to assist the inflammatory process. So, your nutrition needs to support the inflammatory process because all those chemicals are flying around the body trying to bring you back to homeostasis, your normal state, mend the wound, and begin to lay down scar tissue, like we talked about in chat number 1. And it's really important that we support that with good nutrition. So we get this thing called temporary hyperglycemia, which is overglycemia, too much sugar in the bloodstream in the initial post-op phase. And that's because there's actually a reduction in insulin clearance in the body, an increase in catabolic hormones cascading through the body, and this can last a few hours or it can last up to 4 weeks in very, very invasive surgeries, which a hysterectomy is. So if you are having a reduction in insulin clearance and an increase in catabolic hormones, then you're going to be struggling to clear down glucose in the bloodstream, which is why we end up with this temporary hyperglycemia in the body. So it's not great, but generally it doesn't last very long. And what we need to do to manage that in those early days is eat regularly, eat well, eat vegetables, eat plants, and try not to eat too many sugary foods which could increase the glucose in the blood even further. So catabolic hormones, protein catabolism, so that's literally your muscle tissue, your skeletal muscle tissue being eaten away or broken down for use as energy. Protein catabolism is increased immediately post-operative. Your protein synthesis is reduced. That's the protein being made, created and broken down. And the protein breakdown is elevated, so we're trying to use it as a fuel source. Not great, but important in surgical recovery because we need those amino acids being sent to the wound for healing and for that immune response. So what happens is that all these things combined with reduced activity, remember you've had a big surgery, you have to rest, you have to recover, we spend more time sitting. That means that we can be at risk of significant skeletal muscle loss. when we have significant skeletal muscle loss, we tend to need less calories because muscle tissue is highly metabolic. It needs a lot of calories to exist. And it also means that we can reduce our actual strength. So two things which are not ideal. So let's talk about protein. Protein is the preferred fuel source of muscle. So it's really your post-operative best friend. And I would say this is probably 12 weeks that you need to be considering this for. So we need an adequate supply of protein after surgery because of the fact that the body's drawing really heavily on it in order to heal the wound and to lay down that scar tissue and really just to heal itself. So we don't just want to consume adequate protein, but we actually need to consume more than normal to help the body meet its needs. And these needs are coming from this elevation of amino acids. So in studies, they've actually found that a combination of free-form essential amino acids, so this would be in supplement form, plus normal dietary protein could actually be advantageous as it stimulates a large, rapid increase in those essential amino acids, which activates protein synthesis. And then the dietary protein creates a more prolonged, stable availability of essential and non-essential amino acids, which really maximizes the net gain in body protein and what's called I'll try and get this word right, gluconeogenic precursors. So those are the things that help convert protein into glucose for use. We have to consume all 20 protein amino acids. So meat is where we get all those 20 amino acids from. You can get them from plants. It's totally possible, but it does require a little bit more thought because you have to eat a lot more variety to get them. So daily protein intake normally is around 1.2 grams to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So it's a very individualized sum, this. And that's what's recommended for normal. The more activity you do, particularly if we're looking at endurance sports or a lot of weight training, as is in the case of bodybuilding, that means you're going to be sitting at the upper end of that range. If you don't do much exercise, you're not particularly active, you don't do a lot of weight training or endurance sports, you're going to be absolutely fine at that lower end. After surgery, those recommendations actually go up to between 1.6 to 3 grams per kilogram of body weight. So you might be looking at an extra, say, 20 grams to 100 grams of protein additional per day, which is an extra chicken breast or one extra protein shake, something like that. You would have to get on Google and Google where you get 20 grams of protein from to find protein sources that suit you. Now, the recommendation by the accelerated or expedited recovery pathway after surgery, that's ERAS, is that 20 to 40 grams of protein should be consumed per meal. So if you were on the expedited recovery pathway, then you would have been given protein shakes and extra meal shakes, and they would have been very tightly controlling what you ate post-operatively to ensure that you had that protein. But it's good for all of us to make sure we're getting that adequate protein in. The other thing is it has to be high quality. So your McDonald's, I'm afraid, does not count, nor does your cheap and cheerful protein bar. It can include animal products. It can include plant-based proteins, and as I said, if you're only consuming plant proteins, then you must consume a wide variety to ensure that full spectrum of amino acids is eaten. Here are some of your high-quality animal proteins. They include chicken, beef, fish, eggs, and milk. It does tend to be the higher fat dairy that has those quality proteins in. And then for plants, we're looking at lentils, quinoa, black beans, great source of protein, black beans, and make a nice brownie. Soy, peas, and rice, those are all fantastic plant-based proteins. And remember, you do also get protein in small amounts, trace amounts, in vegetables as well. Now, some of your other benefits of protein is that whole food sources of protein, this is animal and fat, they are rich in essential micronutrients, which includes your vitamins, your minerals, your omega-3 fatty acids, which are very important, fibre, antioxidants, phytonutrients, and these are important for overall health as well as recovery. Your plant products, they are a rich source of vitamins and minerals, fibres, and your secondary compounds such as phenols, polyphenols, phytochemicals, antioxidants. So whether you eat meat or not, you should be aiming to get a lot of plant-based proteins and plant-based foods in because of all those other benefits. Your animal products, they provide essential nutrients such as zinc, selenium, iron, phosphorus, calcium, B12 and D, which are less abundantly available from plants. So a mixed diet really can be very helpful depending on what your preference is. So we've talked a lot about protein. What about carbs and fats? Well, for most of us, we should be getting between 40 to 50% of our daily requirements from carbohydrates, and that should really be your fruits and vegetables, your whole grains, your legumes, your pulses, those sorts of things. And then fats are going to make up the rest. So if we assume that an average woman needs between 1,700 and 2,000 calories a day, which is going to depend on your usual activity, so how much leisure exercise, and then how much activity a woman does during the day. So it's going to be different whether you run around after kids all day or you sit at a desk. So we're going to assume that that's going to be reduced during the initial recovery phase and then gradually ramp up. We can actually work out how much fat, carbohydrate and protein should be consumed if we work out protein first. So here's an example, and you can work this out for yourself. So I've given you an example here of a 70 kilogram woman who prior to surgery exercised 3 times a week for about an hour, runs around after 2 teenagers, does a lot of household chores, walks for half an hour most days. So we're going to say that she burns on average 2,000 kilocalories a day based on that 70 kilogram weight. So we're going to give her a pre-surgery protein requirement of 1.5 grams per kilogram, so in the middle of that range, which is going to give her 105 grams of protein per day. So there are 4 calories per gram of protein. 4 calories per gram of protein. So that's going to give her 105 grams of protein. We're going to up that to 1.8 for 12 weeks post-surgery, which means she is going to now have 126 grams of protein. So that's 1 extra chicken breast or 1 extra protein shake or 1 extra something with about 20 grams in per day. And we're going to say that post-surgery, certainly in those initial few weeks, she's probably only burning about 1,500 calories. So if we go, all right, 1,600 calories is your daily target, because we don't want to be in a deficit. We want to be slightly above maintenance because it's so important that our body has enough calories to heal. So we're going to give her 1,600 calories a day. 504 calories of that are from protein, or 126 grams of protein. 45% of that total of 1,600 calories is going to come from carbohydrate. That's going to give us 720 calories because that's also 4 calories per gram. The remainder is going to come from fat. Now, fat actually has 9 calories per gram. So we're going to eat 376 calories from fat, which is about 42 grams. So a little bit less on the fat front, but that's going to keep us roughly in balance calorie-wise while giving us that extra protein. And then when she goes back to her normal calorie and protein consumption, we will give a little bit back to carbs and the rest back to fat. So have a go at working that out for yourself and see where your amounts come to. And if you don't know how many calories you burn a day, a very simple way to work that out is simply to wear a tracker such as a Fitbit, which is not 100% accurate, but will certainly give you an idea. Now let's talk about gut microbiome. You may or may not have heard of this emerging area of science and nutrition, but it's really important, and for ages we knew nothing about it. But gut microbiome may well be the missing link in all sorts of diseases and weight management. These are our living friends. They live on our skin, they live inside us, and a lot of them live in our gut. And our gut microbiome is very, very tightly linked to our immune system. Some scientists go as far as saying 80% of our immune system lies in our gut. There is also a gut-brain axis. So gut microbiome that is a little bit poorly can be potentially linked with depression and anxiety, which is very interesting because after surgery, a lot of people struggle with depression and anxiety, and our gut microbiome is severely affected and compromised after any surgery because they give us antibiotics, which kind of kill everything. So after you've had surgery, your gut microbiome is effectively wiped out because of the antibiotics. Then we don't tend to want to eat very well because we don't have much of an appetite. And we need to rebuild that diverse population. The best way to do this is with a big, diverse array of plants, vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, seeds, herbs, spices, and fermented foods. There is lots of research supporting fermented foods as being very helpful for gut microbiome. Kefir, kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi, anything that's fermented. So even a basic fermented yogurt or probiotic yogurt will be very helpful. It's also recommended that a 3-month course of probiotics be taken after surgery because this does help expedite return to normal function. And the quicker you can rebuild your gut microbiome through a combination of the probiotics and diet, that variety of plant-based foods, we do not get microbiome benefit from meat at all. It's all through plant-based foods and whole grains. The sooner you can build that, the sooner you're going to recover, not just in terms of your wound healing, but in terms of your mental health, your immunity, your robustness, and your feeling of joie de vivre, just feeling good again. Let's look at weight. Hysterectomy and weight gain. Is it fact or is it fiction? I don't know about you, but when I had my hysterectomy, I was in a Facebook support group, and there was a lot of chat in that group about weight gain, people being worried about gaining weight after they had the hysterectomy because they heard that the hysterectomy caused weight gain. And those posts would get a lot of comments with people saying, yes, I gained pounds and pounds and kilograms. Other people would say, nope, I was fine. Nope, didn't gain weight at all, lost weight. So it's a really big question, and it's a worry for a lot of women. Can the surgery itself cause weight gain, or are there other factors involved? Well, in 2008, a study was performed in America, and this was performed on a large group of women. It was an observational study, and they took 236 pre-menopausal women undergoing hysterectomy. So that's important. They're pre-menopausal. They are not going through the menopause. They were all having a hysterectomy with ovary conservation, which meant they did not necessarily go immediately into surgical menopause. They matched those women with 392 women not having a hysterectomy, but who were from the similar area and were recruited from similar doctors' surgeries. So they were deemed really to be matched in a very similar way for demographic. And what that study found was that, yes, more women having hysterectomy with ovary preservation did increase their weight from that baseline to the 1-year check-in point. So they tracked them for 1 year. They took their weight, they took statistics, they took bloods before the op and at 1 year. And yes, they had gained more weight than their control counterparts. The percentage of women gaining more than 10 pounds was also significantly higher than in the control group. 17%, in fact, of women in the hysterectomy group gained more than 10 pounds, compared to 13% in the control group. The average weight gain after 1 year in the hysterectomy group was 1.6 kilograms, and it was 0.9 kilograms for the control group. So this is a significant difference. What caused it, though? Was it the surgery itself, or were there other factors? Now, I will point out that this is observational, and there are lots of differences at play here. But what the study found was that women undergoing hysterectomies generally in their study had a higher starting weight, a higher BMI. They exercised less, but they had more strenuous jobs. They tended to have had more pregnancies, and they were also more likely to be from lower socioeconomic backgrounds than their control counterparts. So if we look at that, we see that there are other factors at play rather than just the hysterectomy itself, and it perhaps is more likely that the women who are a heavier weight to begin with go on to have a hysterectomy and their weight goes on more easily because of those underlying factors rather than the surgery itself. Let's continue. Women having their hysterectomy for fibroids, they tended to be heavier than those having them for other conditions, and they tended to be clinically obese more often than for any other condition. And what we know about fibroids is actually that obesity is a known risk for fibroids. Now again, this is not going to apply to everyone. I had my surgery for fibroids and I am a slim size 10 woman. So where they find these things, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's everyone, but this is just a pattern that they see as they filter through the data. Women having abdominal surgery, they also tended to put on more weight than their laparoscopic counterparts. They also tended to be heavier than them at baseline. And if women are having abdominal surgery, sometimes it is the weight that is the reason that they have to have the surgery abdominally rather than laparoscopically, because obesity increases the risks of a difficult surgery or complications during surgery. So that's sometimes why a surgeon will opt for an abdominal route with women that are obese or considered obese at that surgery point. And I'm trying to be very careful about how I talk about this because, again, it is not necessarily gospel, but this is all what's coming out in the data. So this is a complex subject. It is not necessarily the surgery itself that is the cause of the weight gain. There are multiple factors when it comes to weight, and it's really important to look at them on a case-by-case basis for each and every woman and be careful of generalization. And it's important to also mention that women who are struggling with being more overweight, it's not a case of saying you must lose weight and then all these things will go away, because there is a massive emotional and mental side to weight, to losing weight, that goes with that. So this is a huge, big melting pot of a subject, but the important thing here is that the surgery itself is not necessarily going to cause you to gain weight. What does that mean for you? Well, surgery means a period of inactivity. This inactivity often causes an increase in weight if energy is not modified. So I know for me, my energy expenditure went from 2,000 to 2,500 calories a day that I was burning to about 1,600 because I wasn't exercising as normal. So if I had carried on eating as normal, I would have gained weight. I didn't. I was quite careful, and as a consequence, I maintained my exact same weight and still to this day have. Now, I do want you to know that surgery is not a time to lose weight. It's really important that you're eating enough to fuel recovery, as we have mentioned before, but it is an easy time to put weight on if you're not careful. As we looked at, based on certain baseline factors, a woman may be more or less likely to put weight on during her recovery, and that really depends on the recovery behaviour and the absence of prolonged side effects or complications. Not everyone has a smooth recovery. Some women have horrible recoveries, and to add trying to maintain weight to that can just be an extra thing not to need to worry about. So sometimes this is something you just need to worry about later. Modifying your energy intake to maintain your weight whilst your activity is lower will mitigate the risk of increasing weight. Tracking, as I said, can be useful. That's something that I did. And also just trying to avoid inflammatory food. So your processed food, your sugars, your high-fat foods, they are inflammatory foods, and that can have a systemic knock-on effect. The body is trying to heal, and if we give it inflammatory foods, that's not going to help us with our recovery. And an interesting fact, which is starting to become talked about, is that anyone, man or woman, who carries a lot of abdominal fat is highly inflammatory. It's nicknamed angry fat because it's very inflammatory, and it can actually create a systemic inflammation effect throughout the entire body, and that can reduce healing. That's going to have a knock-on effect if you're not healing poorly. That's going to mean that you're less likely to move, and that's really going to have a cascade effect down. So an anti-inflammatory diet can help with your weight as well as your recovery, and that anti-inflammatory diet really is your plants and avoiding those processed high sugar, high fat foods. So what I'm saying is this doesn't mean you're doomed. It means you had surgery. It means you have to have some downtime in order to recover. Your body went through a huge trauma and it needs time to heal. So let's really support it with some good food, some good nutrition, lots of plants, some healthful lean meats, some good quality fats such as olive oils. Okay. Last little bit, nutrition and menopause. Now, menopause is a subject we're going to look at another week, but nutrition and menopause is an interesting new area. Now, women are not often studied, and this is because women are complicated to study, so scientists don't use us when they look at population research. Generally, they use reference man, who is a college student, around 20, around 6 foot, and they like to be paid to be studied on because they're poor. That means everybody else doesn't get a look in generally, but some scientists are now starting to study women. It costs them more because you have to recruit about 3 times as many women to a study as you do men, because you have to allow for various factors. But some very interesting research is now being done by Zoe, and you may have heard of them through COVID because they did a lot of research on COVID and had the Zoe COVID symptom study app. They've been looking at nutrition, and they have found that nutrition can benefit menopausal side effects. And as we're going to look at when we get to our menopause week, menopause has many, many side effects. They're very unpleasant. Hot flushes and sleeplessness are 2 of the most debilitating ones for many women, whether you go into menopause surgically or normally. Recent research by Zoe has looked into the effects of nutrition and gut microbiome on menopausal symptoms, and what it's found is that healthy gut biome was associated with reduced severe symptoms in menopausal women, which is very interesting. And as we've already mentioned, healthy gut biome is achieved through diversity of all foods, but especially your plants, because they have the prebiotics and the fibers in them which help us create a diverse, healthy, blooming gut biome. If we reduce our red meat and processed food consumption, we reduce full-fat dairy, alcohol and sugar consumption, then we are helping support our gut microbiome. And in women of menopausal age, that does seem to lead to less severe symptoms. Interesting, isn't it? So a Mediterranean-style diet is consistently rated top in most research for all outcomes. And what the Zoe study has found is that, again, a Mediterranean-style diet is best for menopausal women, as it contains an abundance of healthful foods and a minimal amount of processed foods. And what I will say is everybody likes the occasional treat, but occasional is the key word in there. So although diet is more than just weight loss, diet gives us eyeballs, it gives us energy, it gives us oomph. And it's important that we consider the human, but that we consider our microbiome world, as without it, we actually wouldn't exist. Studies on what they call clean mice with microbiome completely removed, kept in a sterile environment, not much fun for the mice. They actually have reduced brain function, impaired immunity, they're more likely to be depressed. So our microbiome is really worth looking after with a healthy diet. So it's It's not just about losing weight. It's not just about being skinny, but it's really about eating for health and longevity. And the more we consider that as we look at our nutrition, the better we are going to be, and the more likely we are to also just be a healthy weight. I hope you have found that interesting. I love nutrition. I'm not a nutritionist, but I find it a fascinating subject. I would recommend having a look at the Zoe nutrition stuff. You can find their information on joinzoe.com and their nutrition tab. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on email, Instagram, or Facebook, and I shall get back to you. For now, thanks for joining me, and I will talk to you again soon.